Well, hey everyone, welcome back to Life Lifters. My name is Brian. I'm one of the pastors at Lakeshore Community Church and just so excited that we get to spend this time together every day. And today I want to talk about this idea of how can we trust God in the middle of the storm? How do we know we can really trust him, right? And to do that, I want to look at this passage that was the passage that really got me into full-time ministry. And it was the first passage that I learned how to study under a pastor I greatly respect and look up to. And it's in the Gospel of Mark, in chapter 4 and verse 35. And it says, "That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, 'Let us go over to the other side.' And leaving the crowd behind, he took him along with him, just as he was in the boat. And there were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. And Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. And the disciples woke him and said, 'Teacher, don't you care if we drown?' He got up and he rebuked the wind and said to the waves, 'Quiet, be still.' And then the wind died down and it was completely calm. And he said to his disciples, 'Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?' They were terrified and asked each other, 'Who is this that even the wind and the waves obey him?'" Now, I don't know if you guys remember the show, The Deadliest Catch, on the Discovery Channel, and used to watch it all the time. I love those reality TV shows. And you'd have these giant fishing boats. They were fishing for Alaskan king crabs, and they would go out into like the worst conditions, and they're pulling up these massive traps filled with hundreds of crabs and bringing them back. But it was so dangerous for them. You'd see things of the ship flying around, people getting thrown, the squalls coming up and over. Those guys knew what to expect out in that ocean, right? But here we are in our passage, and we're at the Sea of Galilee, and we have all these fishing boats crossing. Now, these weren't large fishing boats like we have now. These were small. They can only fit a couple guys. They can bring up the fish onto the boat and bring it back. They're all crossing. It says a furious squall just rises up, and waves are breaking over the boat. It's nearly swamped. It's filling with water, and Jesus was in the stern. He's in the back, and it says he was sleeping on a cushion in the back of the boat. So the disciples run to him, and they say, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" That's a crazy statement, because the disciples, most of these guys, they were fishermen. They knew what to expect. These were like the guys in The Deadliest Catch who knew exactly what they were going out into. So when you have the fishermen who have lived on the water coming running saying, "We're going to drown. This is it. This is like a serious thing," right? And they go back there and they find the rabbi, their teacher, Jesus, sleeping in the back. And he gets up. In verse 39, it says, he got up, he rebukes the wind, and he said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." And then the wind died down and it was completely calm. Now, why did this happen? Well, we have to remember that in the Sea of Galilee, it's about 680 feet below sea level, surrounded by hills. So these winds would come in and they'll just churn up the Sea of Galilee, causing all kinds of problems. So these freak storms would just show up. This is exactly what happened. But he gets up and he calms the whole thing down just by speaking. And he turns to his disciples. He says, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" And it says they were terrified. Who is this that even the wind obeys him? These were guys that lived this life. They knew the water. They were fishermen, yet they were terrified. Their storm was a literal storm. But the storms that we face every single day in our lives are more of that proverbial storm, right? It may look different. Maybe it was a loss of a job. Maybe it was something else, but a storm nonetheless that causes us to be afraid. And Jesus gets up and he says, "Calm and be still." And he calms the storm itself. And then he turns to his disciples and says, "Do you still have no faith?" They didn't realize at the time that he was who he said he was. They didn't realize that he had all the authority and power of God in him to do those things, even though he was teaching those things. They didn't see it. And even afterwards, they were terrified because they didn't understand the whole thing. But what I want us to walk away with is this idea is when storms come in our lives, it may not be a hurricane. Maybe it is, I don't know. But it may not be a hurricane. It may be something more relevant to our real world, our situation, whatever that means for you. And it churns up. We have really two options. We can be like the disciples and we can worry and we can assume that God doesn't care and that God has left us. Or we can resist the fear. We can try to resist the fear and hold tight onto God because we know he is God and we know he is powerful. I remember as a kid, anytime a thunderstorm would come, especially when we were camping, because there's only those canvas walls between you, the thunderstorm would roll in and I'd be terrified. The ground would shake. As a young kid, I'm freaking out at this point. So what would I do? As a young kid, I'd run to my parents and I'd nuzzle up with them because I was so scared. And yet the sound didn't go away. I was holding on to my mother and father and kind of burying myself in them because I was so scared. And yet the ground is still rumbling, right? And the storm is still raging around us. Yet I had this comfort and trust that my parents were going to protect me. Even though I was still afraid, I knew I had to just fight it. And that's true of every single day of our lives. So the fact is, and I want us to walk away with this, is that Jesus is worthy of our trust, especially in the storm. And I hope you guys are encouraged by this. Would you pray with me? Father, again, I just thank you for everything that you do in our lives. I thank you that we can turn to you and we can trust you in the midst of a storm. And whatever storm we're facing right now, I pray that we would resist fear and we'd lean into you in this time, Jesus. We thank you, and we do see that you are worthy of trusting. We trust you now. In your name, amen.